Hello, this is James Ferrell with the Ferrell, Maritime, and Mesothelioma Law Group. I want to talk to you today a little bit about the disease of mesothelioma. Mesothelioma is a very rare but aggressive cancer. New mesothelioma diagnosis cases in the United States only number about 3,000, somewhere between 2,800 and 3,000 cases every year. Mesothelioma, the only known cause of mesothelioma for males in the United States is asbestos. And so if you're diagnosed with mesothelioma, that is from breathing asbestos fibers. When my clients come to me, they frequently talk about having flu-like symptoms. And what that means is they go into their doctor, they have trouble breathing, they have pain in their chest, they have trouble sleeping. In many cases, they've had an unexplained weight loss. Now, that's how the symptoms progress and present. Many times, the primary care physician that you go to see will diagnose a flu because those are very common symptoms. And what happens is the flu symptoms do not resolve, and the pain continues. In many cases, you have a fluid on the lungs. And so what happens in those cases, the doctors will go in and puncture a little hole and drain the fluid. Now, if the symptoms progress, in many cases your primary care physician may send you to a pulmonologist. And a pulmonologist is just a lung doctor. He specializes, or she specializes, in the treatment of diseases of the lung. It is very common for the pulmonologist then to take x-rays and do various scans of your lungs. If at that time the doctor believes that you have a suspicious mass, the doctor may go ahead and make a referral for you to have a biopsy. In that case, you'll be put in the hospital and the doctors will either open your chest and take a tissue sample, but in many cases, they'll just come in and take a needle biopsy, which is stick a needle in and take a sample of the tissue. And I talk about this a little bit more in another video where I talk about, in a little more detail, mesothelioma medicine. But if you are diagnosed with mesothelioma, there are various treatment avenues for you. In some cases, if the mesothelioma is diagnosed early enough, you'll be treated by trying to remove the tissue, actually surgery, where the doctors will remove some of the cancerous tissue. In many cases, chemotherapy may be prescribed or radiation may be prescribed. Again, mesothelioma is only caused by asbestos and respirable asbestos fibers. Now, in the 1930s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and even up into the 70s and 80s, there were many products in the market at different periods of time which contained asbestos. The primary one people talk mostly about is asbestos thermal insulation, and that's often a pipe covering or asbestos block insulation that is made of asbestos. But there were many other products. In the drilling industry, drilling mud additives had asbestos in it. Also in the construction industry, joint compound and shingles all had asbestos in it. In the automotive industries, clutches and brake pads had asbestos in it. So there are many, many products which you may have been exposed to over your lifetime that cause development of mesothelioma. Now, there are also many professions that are at risk. This isn't an exhaustive list, but onshore and offshore oil workers may have been exposed. Drywallers may have been exposed. If you worked in the Navy, if you worked in a shipyard, if you worked in any branch of the military, if you worked on a railroad, if you worked as an automobile mechanic or a heavy truck mechanic, as a tractor mechanic, all of those industries would put you at risk for development of mesothelioma. One of the new cases we're seeing more and more of, very sadly, are loved ones of people who worked in these industries. In many cases, they call it a take-home case. A husband will work in a shipbuilding industry, or they'll work in the military, and they'll bring asbestos fibers home on their clothes. At that point, the wife typically will shake out the clothes before she washes them, or a child will hug their father, and they will be exposed to the asbestos fibers and develop mesothelioma. One of the sad parts about mesothelioma is it can occur even 50 and 60 years after the initial exposure. So your last exposure to in working in an asbestos-related industry as an insulator or other trade may have been 40 or 50, 60 years ago. I have one client who worked in a shipyard when he was in his 20s. He was not diagnosed with mesothelioma until he was in his 70s. So it can take a very long time to get diagnosed. If you are diagnosed with mesothelioma, there are options, treatment options, but there's monetary avenues available for recovery. One thing we do at the Ferrell Law Group is we go ahead and we will file a mesothelioma claim with the Bankruptcy Asbestos Trust. And there are various trusts, you may have heard about them in TV ads, that have been set aside. Some of these companies, such as John Mansfield and Owens Corning, have been around, have filed for federal bankruptcy protection, but there's money set aside for you to file claims on. In addition, you may be able to file a civil lawsuit. In other words, you may be able to file a claim against companies that are still in business that made asbestos products. You may be able to file a claim against some of the premises where you worked and were exposed to asbestos. And finally, you may be able to, depending on the law of your state, you may be able to sue your employer. So if you believe that you are the victim of a mesothelioma case, contact an experienced mesothelioma attorney, and we're glad to provide you any information you need